Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at The Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And I'm Pete Wright. Or I was.
Today we're talking about minute 66, which begins with Natasha saying there's no way she'll let Loki out and ends with Loki lashing out. Back on the show, it's author and professor of political science, Matthew Costello. Hello.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Oh, we just love having these conversations with you. And this is another of these, very separate minutes that you've picked over the span of this film. And I wanted to find out, what is it about this conversation that we're getting between Loki and Natasha that fascinated you and said, I want to talk about that minute?
Well, there are really two things about this minute particularly that I like. One, we get to see a lot of Loki and Natasha here, right? The characters, right? Natasha, this is where we really first start to see how dark Natasha's past is, right? We've had hints, but now we really start to see it. And so this becomes a minute about redemption. She's thinking about redemption. Loki, on the other hand, we really watch him play her. We watch Loki be the manipulator that he is. And so we get these sort of wonderful little character moments here. And the second is, I think it's an incredibly well shot and framed and acted scene. I love the cut to her and her reaction as he's going through her past. That's a really nice reaction shot. And the final camera shot where we see Loki's face reflected in the glass, almost superimposed over Natasha's face, which sort of presages what we're going to find out, that they're playing each other. And nobody really knows that yet because she's doing such a good job and he's doing such a good job. But they really are both manipulating each other. And so it's sort of it's a well-shot, well-constructed, well-thought-out minute. I like the way it's blocked, framed, and I like what happens in it.
It's a great exploration of these two characters as kind of like master manipulators going up against each other. And I think that's what's fun about this scene is, Loki really getting into this place where he feels he now has enough pieces to get at her. And, she is enough of a spy and manipulator where she is playing into exactly, as we'll find out, she's doing exactly what he is wanting her to do. And it's fun to see kind of like how she's doing it. And when you're watching the scene play, it really feels like he has found what he needs to get under her skin. And it plays in an interesting way. I like the way that we have it. I do have a question, though. In the scope of the relationship that Barton and Natasha clearly have had, they've obviously, gotten along for a long time. They've known each other for a very long time. They've worked together for a long time. And he, as she finds out here, he has told Loki all of these secrets of hers. Is there space to think about in the film where Barton might have also told Loki, she's pretty much, she knows how to find the ways into these, these situations and play it where you don't realize you're getting played. That's kind of her job. Is that something that he should have told Loki?
Well, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that, but as I think about it, right, he's going to tell Loki what Loki asked for, right? He's being mind controlled. I don't think Loki would think to ask for it. Largely because Loki's problem is his hubris, right? His belief that he understands the situation. And that's what's going on. He feels he's manipulating her. She's reacting, as you point out, exactly the way he expects her to react, right? When in fact, none of this is really bothering her all that much. She's come to terms, right? As she says, I'm Russian. This crap doesn't bother me all that much. It does, but not to the point where she's actually going to be manipulated by him on this. And it's his hubris, in fact, that does him wrong here. And I think that probably he wouldn't bother to ask Clint, what if I said this to her? Is she how would she respond? He knows how she'll respond. He thinks he knows how she'll respond because he's Loki.
Yeah, I mean, the only evidence that we get that Clint might have some agency over what he does or does not tell Loki is in a cutscene that nobody ever really gets to see, that we've looked at, because of the, by dint of history and deleted scenes. And so what we know of Clint is he's given Loki, as you say, everything that he wants. The thing that's interesting about this little dance between them, I think it's Loki that is operating on his heel, because Natasha is coming at this knowing that she's playing catch up, right? She is interrogating him because there is stuff that Loki knows that she doesn't know. But to your point, his hubris causes him to reveal more about her, that he knows more about her, and do this little dance and get out of sync, right? Like ultimately he loses the dance because she's better at this than he is. He allows too much ego to get in the way of his own efforts to bluster through an interrogation. And I think that makes it really fascinating, also because both of these performers are so very, very good at conveying all these subtextual cues that I think are fantastic. It is once again the magic of narrative that we have to sort of suspend a little bit of disbelief that I just am not sure that he would have gotten even as much as he does out of Barton. Like, it just seems like, to your point, like he doesn't know what he doesn't know. So why does he know Dreykov's daughter? Like those kinds of lines work well when you're not watching the movie 1 minute at a time, but it is a thing that sort of takes me out of sequence a little bit.
Yeah. But Natasha's sort of acceptance of her past comes back a little bit later in one of the funnier moments in the film, when she sort of joyfully or gleefully reminds him that this all seems like Belarus. She tells Barton, this all seems like, Belarus or Budapest. And he's like, you have a very different remembrance of Budapest than I did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So she's done horrible things, and she's got red in her ledger. And part of this is her redemption story. That's sort of her character arc at some level. But she doesn't really think she's got all that much to be redeemed from. She's okay with a lot of it.
Well, I agreed. Why do you think she drops? Like, whose benefit is it that she drops "I'm Russian" or "I was"? Is it for Loki's benefit or ours as the audience?
It's a great line, though, isn't it?
Oh, it's a great line.
It's that sort of Cold War. I read Dostoevsky when I was 15, kind of thing. You just kind of I know you. Right.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's for her benefit too. She's just sort of her reminding herself who she is. I don't know whose benefits for, but it works for me.
It's probably that is probably the third best choice in answering that question. I don't think it's for Loki's, because he is a god. Like, he doesn't care.
Right. They're all Midgardians as far as he's concerned.
Right. Exactly. and so, for her to say those words aloud, particularly, acknowledging the red in her ledger, I think it makes more sense. But it has always felt like a particularly written line, because it feels good to write those lines and see those lines performed, and yet it is, from the character's perspective, I think it makes most sense for it to be from her. That's a good way to read it.
Yeah, but you're right. Loki wouldn't care. It wouldn't matter to him.
Right.
I also like this when he's talking to her about this idea of the world in the balance, and you bargain for one man. That's an interesting line to kind of throw out also, because I suppose in the scope of her being a spy, it's like, I mean, obviously we know she cares about Clint. There is this side of him, and as she says here, she wants to wipe out the red in her ledger, and Clint is going to be part of doing that. But I like the sense that what Loki gets from his conversation with Clint is this draw to saving Clint as the one person, like that she really has this draw to him. It's less about the big picture and more about this individual, which is, I don't know, it's an interesting thing for Loki to have found as something that is key to get under her skin, where in reality, it's like that kind of goes against the grain as far as anything that somebody who is a spy would be really focusing on. And so it's kind of interesting, like that he's ended up interpreting it that way. And I mean, and he uses it to his advantage, but obviously she's using it more to her advantage. But I find that to be an interesting line as well. Your world in the balance and you bargain for one man.
Well, I kind of think part of that is also that she views herself as a soldier. I mean, she's a spy, but she's a soldier, right? And soldiers will tell you very frequently that they're not fighting for justice. They're not fighting for a cause. They're fighting for the guy next to them. They're fighting for their buddies. And they won't leave their buddies behind. And Clint is her person, right?
Right.
And so in that context, it makes perfect sense from her perspective, which again suggests Loki just doesn't get her. And he's playing out of his league, right? He's like moving forward and he's doing all that action stuff with a voice and, you have so much red. Yeah. I mean, he would twirl his mustache if he had one at that moment, in victory. And I mean, Pete's right. He's out of his league in this case. She's got him already. I don't think we're aware of it because she's doing such a good job. She's got us too.
Yeah.
Right. That the reaction shot when we cut from him to her, and before anything happens, you watch her eyes just slightly widen, her nostrils just slightly flare, and then you can see her take in breath. And it's this sort of perfect reaction shot to someone who's supposed to be losing control. Right. And she's playing losing control. So it's really well done. But I think that it's an interesting line because it works in the context of, if you think of these people as world-saving heroes. But I don't think she views herself as a world-saving hero. I think she even says later at some point to Clint, we're out of our league. These are gods and we're schmucks or something. Right. But that is a real interesting way to cut into it, I think, is with that particular line.
Yeah, it's again, it just really goes to this gamesmanship between these two characters. Because, I mean, I suppose, the goal of somebody who is using this sort of manipulation as a tool to get information or to come out ahead or whatever the case may be when you're doing this, it's this constant need to shift and change and modify what you're saying in order to find the next thing that's going to kind of get even further under their skin, right? Because you'll say something, they're going to respond in some capacity, and then you might have to completely change your approach. And that certainly is the case over the course of this conversation before this minute and after this minute, as they kind of are doing this dance and trying to find ways. And Loki, what we get in this minute is Natasha's doing a good job of playing against Loki. And even with the lines like that, your world in the balance, you bargain for one man, like she's got the perfect response for him about, regimes fall every day. I tend to not weep over that. I'm Russian, or I was. And then he uses that as the opportunity to push into this whole thing about the Red Ledger and really starts going into hammering her on all these details that he knows. Dreykov's daughter, Sao Paulo, the hospital fire. And we start seeing a reaction from her. And that's, as they're doing this dance, each of them is always looking for that thing, that this is the thing that's going to push those buttons. And Loki finds it right here. And she's showing it in her face. And obviously, as we'll find out, she's doing that intentionally to show him that he thinks that now he has found the tool that's going to get to her. But it's nice. And like, that's what is so great about a scene like this with actors performing it in just such a strong way. And I mean, as you pointed out earlier, Matthew, the cinematography, like that shot toward the end of this minute when, she has stood up and she's closer to the glass and he stands and walks over to it. And you get that shot of her with his reflection, like hovering right over her as he's going through all of this stuff about her ledgers dripping and gushing red. I mean, it's just so effectively constructed. It's like, this is one of those standout moments in this film because of all of that.
And it's also geeky. When we talk film, right, we talk about the scene, but we also talk about the montage and how they fit, right? You talk about mise en scène and montage, right? The scene is also cut in well. As you see at the end of this, we start to go back and we look at Captain America finding the weapon, and we look at Tony and Bruce, who are, finding the cube and having their argument and all these other things going on out there. And what we realize is that while Natasha may not be manipulated by Loki, everybody else is.
Right.
Right. This whole situation, right? This moment, right, suddenly opens up as we cut into these clips of these others with Loki's voice over it. and we realize everybody else is getting played. When she snaps back and we realize she's not getting played, we also are then going to go and watch, Bruce start to lose it with the scepter and all these other things. And so it's also the location of this and the editing of the film as well, that this moment of manipulation becomes sort of just a little piece of the broader manipulation that's been going on that's a lot more successful. Right? So maybe Natasha's better than the guys. I mean, maybe that's what this is really all about. It's that, the guys are a bunch of gullible people who get manipulated by Loki, but Natasha's the only one who, can stand up to him.
Yeah, well, and that actually raises an interesting question, because you've been bouncing around this season. I think we've talked about Steve, with you. We've talked. Who else have we talked about? We've talked about Loki, and the other. We've talked about Coulson, but I'm curious from the you're the one who pivoted my view of this movie, particularly as S.H.I.E.L.D. turns fascist, and I'm fascinated. That has been taken up low-key rent in my mind at watching this movie. And I'm curious your position on Natasha as a character, because I think this is the first time we've talked about Black Widow with you, right?
Yeah.
So where do you come down on Black Widow and her position as both, I guess, from an ideological, political position as a Marvel comic book hero, and as a hero, and as part of a fandom?
I liked her in the comics. There was a short Gene Colan run in Amazing Adventures in the early 70s that I thought was awesome. There was the run where it was Daredevil and the Black Widow, and they were in San Francisco, and that was kind of cool. This is sort of the redeemed Soviet spy who becomes the head of the Avengers at one point. It's a good arc in the book. She's a fine character. She's a fine character. I really liked her here. I really liked her in Endgame. I was not so thrilled with the whole feminizing of her in Ultron. I didn't hate the Black Widow movie, but I probably couldn't tell you anything about it off the top of my head. It's like the film Watchmen. I once described to someone, I said, 2 weeks after going to see Watchmen, someone will say, "Have you been to the movies lately?" He said, "Yeah, I saw something 2 weeks ago, but I can't remember what it was." And that's sort of how the Black Widow film struck me. So I really like her here. I mean, I think they do a wonderful thing with her and Clint here. The superhero story frequently, particularly of late, is a redemption story. I mean, there's really a redemption story. There's always some trauma from which they need to be redeemed, right? Peter Parker lets Uncle Ben die. Captain America loses Bucky. Natasha's got red in her ledger. And so she does the redemption story really well. I mean, she does it really well without selling out who she is, right? I mean, she doesn't become wussy. She doesn't become weak, right? She's still, right? She's not really sorry for all the stuff she does. She knows it's bad and she'd like to pay it off, but she did it.
Yeah, context matters, right? For her, right? That was then. This is now. Let's go forward. Yeah,
right. But I admit I did bad things, and I should pay for that.
Yeah,
and I don't do bad things anymore, unless they need to be done, and then I'll do them.
Right.
She is her history is a very interesting character, and to your point, my take on the Black Widow film is that it really. There was room for that story to have been expanded into a trilogy, and they could have really given that character a whole lot more depth. I feel like by the time they got to that in phase 4, I feel like Feige had already kind of delineated the very specific direction that he wanted to go. And the unfortunate thing about the Black Widow movie is that it felt like an afterthought, we really should just give her own movie. She's been in it long enough. And it felt that way, as opposed to feeling like, let's give her the story that the character deserves. And I feel like after phase 3 they've turned into just a rush to get, we've got to do this film, which is going to set up the next film, and that's going to set up the next film, and this TV show, and all this, and they're not allowing kind of the space for these things anymore. And that's the thing that I felt with that film that we didn't get, which was very unfortunate, because of all the characters that we've been following over the course of the first 3 phases, she's the one who I felt like was given one of the shortest shrift, I don't know. I just felt like there was room to really explore her story more, and that's unfortunate.
There's a lot of implied depth.
Yeah, right.
In this character who doesn't show up very much, and I don't think the Black Widow film gave us that depth.
No.
And I don't think the Ultron story gave us the depth we wanted. I think it sort of undermined the character in some ways.
Right. Because, I mean, the film was really there to set up her sister and her father and like those characters that we'll see in later Marvel properties. It's like it didn't.
But will we ever get another Black Widow movie? Will we get a Black Widow 2? I don't think so. And I think the challenge that I have with it is that, we had such opportunity with this Black Widow story. And I think you could argue that there was an appetite that Marvel did not understand, given the just hallucinatory fandom over the Americans that was happening at the same time. Like, why didn't we leverage a Russian spy story for Black Widow when people were hungry for it, right? It is absurd to me that we missed that exit off of the Marvel highway. It feels like a massive misunderstanding of the market. And now the character is bench strength. Right, like now even the character, in new hands is, now that Scarlett Johansson is out of the picture, I just don't think we're ever going to get back to this. I'll be gobsmacked if we get back to it.
I'm pretty sure she said that was it. Like, I'm pretty sure that she said she's done with it.
Yeah, but it might have been fun to see a Black Widow meets Barton back in, say, 78, or 82 or something,
Right. Let's see how we got to this point. That could have been such fascinating political setup for leading to answering the question, how did this former Soviet spy and assassin end up an Avenger? Right. It's always been taken as written that she's always been here. And I feel like they've never really addressed that in the MCU, and it's frustrating. So
yeah, particularly since they did such a nice job on the Winter Soldier, is sort of creating that Cold War vibe.
Hallelujah!
Right? They could have done the same thing with the Black Widow as a period piece, and it would have been fantastic.
Yeah. And instead, we got just this popcorn fare, which was fine in the Black Widow, but it did end with characters jumping off of debris falling through the air. And that was like nonsense action sequence for me. Like, it was just like, I can't even with this. Like, it's trivial. It becomes trivial.
It's very frustrating. However, speaking of the Black Widow movie, we do get mention here of, as one of the parts of the red in her ledger, Dreykov's daughter, which is, of course, a point that we do explore in the Black Widow film, as we do find out about Dreykov as the general who is overseeing the Red Room, which, of course, is the exploding thing in the sky that you're talking about here. But, of course, the moment with his daughter is when Natasha tries to kill him, but his daughter is there. That's Antonia. And she, at this point, Natasha thinks that she actually killed Antonia. Of course, it's not until the Black Widow movie, which takes place after this, that we find out that Antonia did survive and is, in fact, working with her father. She is Taskmaster now, and that's the whole thing in that film. We also hear about Sao Paulo, which is, in the Marvel Wiki, is the only scope of what we have there is that Natasha got involved in an event there that tormented her for years to come. So clearly that's not anything from anything. What's funny about that, though, is that they also, as far as trivia is concerned, they have a note that in 2017, when Thor Ragnarok was released, they had a commercial that played down in Sao Paulo featuring the Hulk. And so that was kind of just a random thing to include, that they had some partnership with the Renault, and they featured it in a commercial down there. As for the other the mention of the hospital fire, that is not brought up at all in the Marvel Wiki as something that we need to be aware of, apparently. So it's just written there as a line for this conversation.
Yeah.
I guess what's important, though, and what we should take away, is that all of these three things, Dreykov's daughter, Sao Paulo, the hospital fire, as he is saying it, she is clearly having an emotional reaction. And, we've seen this a number of times. And I guess this is another, just the last question about this scene. This is really the third time that she's kind of played this angle in the film. We had it earlier, of course, the scene with the Russians when we first see her come into the film, and the second time in the moment when she's reacting with Bruce. And then, of course, we find out that they are, in fact, there are a whole bunch of other people outside. Is this a trick of hers that we've seen play out too many times, Matthew, or is this like, were those like good setups giving us a sense of what she could do so that we're building to this one, the big one in the film?
Yeah, three in an hour is a lot, right? But it worked for me. I mean, it worked for me. I didn't get tired of it. So yeah, it worked for me. I don't know. How about you guys?
Well, it works for me, and I think this is her Mjolnir. How many times does Thor pull out his hammer? Right, like this is the thing that she's.
This is PG-13, dude.
We'll have to bleep that. Pete.
Okay. I guess how many times does Steve whip out his shield? Did I say that right?
This is the Russ Meyer version of the Avengers.
Right.
Faster, Black Widow, kill.
I feel like this is her tool, and it's the thing that she
can't win that.
Matt, you have to be able to contain yourself. No, I do. I believe that this is the what can I do skill set that she brings to the table, and it never really phases me. It doesn't become a joke.
No, but here's the thing: you're talking about it like being something in their arsenal as far as what they do. When Thor pulls out, when Thor wields Mjolnir in a battle, we know what's going to happen. And I guess this is where I wonder, because the whole idea of the way that Natasha is using this is that it always comes as a surprise. It's always intended for us, the audience, as much as whoever it is she's talking to come as a surprise. And I guess the question is she so good that even as an audience, we're still buying into it, even though this is the third time that she's done it to us? And I guiltily say I bought into it. Like, I didn't think like, oh, she's totally doing that old trick again.
Yeah, we might be able to say that the one with Bruce is a little bit different because nobody believes she went there alone.
Yeah, true.
That's accurate. Yeah, I believe that.
Right. So it may be a little different, but this one, you're right. It's maybe she's really good at it, and so if she did it 6 times, we'd buy it. But
yeah,
maybe we're just really stupid film watchers. And
I know. I feel like
I'm okay with that too.
Yeah, well, that's what is so interesting, because like by the time I get through this, I'm like, I really should have seen this coming. Like, how did I not? Like, this is what she does. She keeps doing this trick over and over. How did I not recognize that this was happening to me again in this movie? So to that end, it's like effective writing, effective performances by the actors here, directing, just scene construction. So to that end, I think that they set us up in a smart way where it's like it ends up not being too much. In fact, it probably ends up being just enough. Like if they did it one more time after this, I think we all would have been like, oh, she's doing it again. But this time, like, it plays perfectly, and we end up kind of falling for it. So
yeah,
I don't mind being manipulated by her in these sequences. I really don't mind. I mean, that's the subterfuge is part of why I'm going to this movie.
Yeah.
It's subtle and effective manipulation, and it's not ham-handed in any ways. It's not like, Armageddon.
Right.
Well, and it's
or dare I say Black Widow.
Well, and it is such an interesting form of manipulation where you're giving them the impression that you have been so completely crushed, like, I mean, I guess it works in the scope of something like The Sting, where, you think that somebody's just been killed. It's all part of the gag, not to spoil a nearly 50-year-old movie, but still, it's like the whole idea that they're completely making you feel like you've just bottomed them out. Like Natasha really is reacting here, like her eyes are welling up with tears. Her throat and her lips are kind of quivering, And she's reacting like, oh my God, you just found the secret door into my heart and now I am broken. And that's that trick that I think that she's pulling off so well. And it works. It's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's wrap it up for today. This has been a great conversation, Matthew. You've got your book out there. We'll put the link in the show notes. Anything else that you're working on?
I'm always working on something. I'll be doing Pal Joey for 3 nights in El Paso. Whatever.
Nice.
That's awesome.
It's dinner theater,
Yeah.
Gotta pay the bills.
Very fun. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, that's it for us today. We'll be back tomorrow with another guest for minute 67. Should be fun. Matthew, thank you again.
Thank you. It's been a ball.
And as always, we'll talk to you again later in the season. But until then, Pete, thanks as always.
Tomorrow, Andy, will you find your way into my heart?
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.